J.G. Ballard was fascinated by flight from his time as a young child. Many of his stories feature small aircraft, particularly in stories like Low-Flying Aircraft and the Cessna crash in the Unlimited Dream Company. For Ballard, flight was more than freedom. It was a metaphor for inner space and the escape from the unconscious mind. Since the dawn of humankind, our dreams of flight have dominated our imaginations. So much so that this cliché is a truism. In literature as well, flight has been a dominant theme. From the proto-SF of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which features flying machines, arguably the oldest book in the world, to the recent flight explorations of J.G. Ballard and others. Flight has become a staple of near-future science fiction in particular. Some of the very finest science fiction writers have been obsessed with flight, and with aircraft in particular. Aside from J.G. Ballard, names such as Christopher Priest, H.G. Wells, and many others loom large. Understandably, as the 20th century was dominated by aircraft, with only 65 years separating the Wright brothers from the moon landing, images of aviation still dominate our consciousness. From the jets that take us on exotic holidays, to the screaming sound of fighters tearing the silk of the skies in sonic boom fury. Our collective consciousness is dominated by the horror of bombers flying overhead and the advent of the definitive moment of our new millennium, 9/11, the confirmation that the end of history claimed by Fukuyama in the early 1990s has not come yet. The silhouette of an aerofoil and its contrail is a sigil of near-future SF. We both worship and cower before the majesty of the aircraft. Per ardua ad astra, through difficulty to the stars, was the motto of the RAF, and the aircraft symbolises both our aspirations and our nightmares. Indeed, the publisher Head of Zeus has recently named their science fiction imprint Ad Astra. However, since that time, they've published very little SF. Science fiction's identification with flight was cemented early. Take, for example, Air Wonder Stories, the magazine launched and edited by Hugo Gernsback, the man who coined the term science fiction, or at least scientifiction, in 1925. H.G. Wells was, of course, ahead of everyone. From The War in the Air, his novel published scant years before the first real war in the air, the Great War, to his short story, A Dream of Armageddon, in which the futurist island of Capri is threatened by a military invasion from the north by air. This story both predicted futurism and the militarism of North Italian fascism many years before it took place. Then later came The Shape of Things to Come, which depicted a world war and was filmed shortly before the Second World War. I found this enormously confusing as a child. Did Wells predict the war? He seemed to have done so. After the war is done, a cadre of aviators run by technocrats plans to unite the world with its global wings. In the early 1950s, J.G. Ballard joined the RAF and was trained in Canada, where he discovered science fiction magazines, and thus his vocation. In his best-selling World War II novel Empire of the Sun, the protagonist, Jim, a young boy imprisoned in a Japanese prison camp, is fascinated by the Zeros flying overhead, the sun glinting on their nacelles, the very icons of imperial power. Empire was, of course, to a degree autobiographical, and the critics revelled in it, for they could see at last where lots of Ballard's famous imagery sprang from, his youth as a captive. As the martial ambitions of the Land of the Rising Sun faded in the Pacific Theatre, the young future novelist Yukio Mishima elected to become a kamikaze, but opted out at almost the last moment. He regretted this all his life, and these regrets are outlined in the closing sections of his book Confessions of a Mask, yet another disguised autobiographical novel. It was bomber planes, of course, that sealed the fate of Japan, dropping their loads on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nor did Europe escape the wrath of the bombers. In one night, the German city of Dresden was razed to the ground by numerous incendiary devices dropped by the British. Captured by the Germans and billeted underground in a subterranean abattoir was the young American soldier Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Horrified by what he experienced, Vonnegut used this as the basis of his science fiction novel Slaughterhouse-5, which has haunted millions of readers from the late 1960s to today. Ballard, of course, was more interested in the atomic implications of what we could hear soaring above our heads. In Empire of the Sun, Jim sees a flash in the sky, which he later realizes is the destruction of Hiroshima. Earlier, in the 1960s, Ballard produced a story called The Terminal Beach, a tale which more than any other could be said to have ushered in the new wave of science fiction. The story depicts a B-52 pilot stranded on an atoll where there has been a nuclear test, and it perfectly underlines the atomic obsessions of our age and the nuclear implications of our future, if we have one. In recent years, screenwriter and novelist Jed Mercurio has thrown his hat into the ring as well. Another trained pilot, his novel Ascent, marketed as a mainstream novel, reveals itself subtly to be a full-blown SF novel as it nears its climax. In his novel The Separation, Christopher Priest masterfully pivots two alternate worlds around the possibilities of twins in World War II. In a gripping segment of the novel, Priest depicts masterfully the flight of Rudolf Hess to the UK on his peace mission. Dazzled, we see Priest play with reality as he bisects and merges it. Was there one plane flying to the UK, or were there two? Priest's school, of course, was situated at the end of a runway beneath the flight path of landing planes. Eventually, the school was closed because of the inherent dangers of low-flying aircraft over the head of our future genius of SF. From the vertical takeoff and landing craft of Indoctrinaire to the same in a more real-world setting in the near-future realpolitik techno-thriller Harrier, written under the name Donald Mackenzie, Priest's obsession was a continuity in his work. And then there are the jets in the opening story of Priest's book The Dream Archipelago, which dive into the gravity anomaly above the world, which allow them to bend space and time according to their own military needs. Again writing as Donald Mackenzie in Thunderbolt, published in 1984, Priest again looks forward to a near-future techno-thriller situation set around a fictitious state near Afghanistan. Although this is a Cold War conflict in the Middle East, it seems emblematic and inherent that it predicts what would come in the decades of intervention in this part of the world which have followed from Western countries. In his final novel and swan song, The Magnificent Airside, we find ourselves in that most disorienting of liminal spaces, the airport. Is it possible to disappear? Are there portals to other different hidden dimensions inherent in the airport? It often seems that way to me. Off limits, can we evanesce into nothingness and escape our lives? It seems that we may. Thematically allied to Mercurio's book, but being written and published decades earlier, James Salter's magisterial The Hunters, in his depiction of fighting MiGs in the Korean War, is possibly the greatest aviation novel ever written. While not SF, it is a book that should be read by everybody with any interest in the poetry of flight, and its ambition, achievement, and fall short are a salutary lesson for all who take to the skies. And we must not forget the helicopter. This was a new invention in the late 1940s when Orwell wrote 1984, and of course the helicopters are used by the thought police to spy on people through their own windows. Orwell talked in the novel about the potential of the helicopter for future warfare, and we saw this extensively in Vietnam and other conflicts since. And in the minds of the inner party, the Mandarins of Oceania, Britain is renamed merely Airstrip 1 in 1984, showing its significance for a future Cold War against an Eastern Bloc, and of course Orwell coined the term Cold War. He saw everything coming before it happened. Even cyberpunk has its dalliances with flight. The Nightwing microlights of Screaming Fist in Neuromancer, Armitage, one of the pilots, hopelessly destroyed, resurrected by Wintermute. And who can forget the moment in Neuromancer when on board the Spindle, captured by the Tearing police, Case uses Wintermute to escape from them and one is killed by a Nightwing microlight. This is symbolic of the flight that Case enjoys in cyberspace and the apotheosis of freedom that Wintermute seeks. So we are seduced by soaring and we seek to fly. But will it be our beginning or will it be our end? Maybe SF can help us. Who knows?